The scripture reading this morning comes from Mark's Gospel in the first chapter. It is Mark's version of the call of the disciples. You see that on the front of your Grow, Pray, Study Guide. So I invite you now to listen for a word from God. As Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went a little farther, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in their boat mending the nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Can you remember when you first went to school? I know for some of us it's a little farther back than for others. But can you remember that time when you were beginning school? Maybe you were 5 or 6 years old. Can you remember how you felt anticipating that first day? How you felt when you met your teacher for the first time? How it felt to be in a learning environment with other kids? What did it feel like to go to school? What do you remember feeling about that? Dread. Spoken in honesty. Who else remembers something about that? Excitement? It's too far back? What did you say, Jim? Sore feet. You had to walk uphill both ways.
Excuse me. New dress shoes.
I rode the bicycle 10 miles each way.
You had to walk to your school?
No, I rode the bicycle.
Oh, you rode a bicycle to school. Well, kids have been going to school forever, learning something new, practicing new tasks, taking in information, growing in a trade. I wonder if you've heard of the Talmud. Anybody heard of that book? I know Jim has. Yeah, others. It's a multi-volume set of books. It's kind of like a commentary from rabbis over many generations about the Hebrew law. The Talmud has this to say about education. Under the age of 6, we do not receive a child as a pupil. But from 6 upward, accept him and stuff him with Torah like an ox. I wonder if any of your teachers have that kind of instruction, or any of ours with school these days. From 6 upward, accept a student and stuff them with Torah like an ox. The saying is a bit of a description about the Hebrew educational system. And this morning I want us to take a little bit of a look at it. It's somewhat like our system of education, where we have primary education, secondary education, and then kind of a graduate level education. There's 3 levels of education for kids who grew up in biblical times. The first stage of education was called Beth Thomason, and that means house of the book. It began around age 6 and lasted to about age 10. And the Torah was the primary learning tool of this stage of school. The Torah was the center of everyone's life. In fact, it was the book of study for all Jewish people. So students in Beth Thomason would memorize Torah. 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Memorize all of it. 6 to 10 years old. The best of the best students after Beth Thomason would be invited to enter into the second stage of education, Beth Talmud, which means the house of learning. So that begins at roughly 10 years of age and goes to about 14. And in Beth Talmud, what you would do if you had been invited to enter into this second stage is that you would memorize the rest of the Hebrew scriptures. All of them. And also you would begin learning the art of questions and answers. Maybe you remember in Luke's gospel, there's a time when Jesus is 12 years old and he's with his parents and they leave Jerusalem and they realize that Jesus is not with them. He's gone missing and they have to go back and they look for him. And where do they find him? It's in the temple. And what is he doing? He is engaging in questions and answers. Because Beth Talmud is where Jesus would have been in his educational process. Luke tells us they found him in the temple sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. We might need to stop here, though, and recognize that, acknowledge maybe that their learning system is a bit different than our Western educational system. Often when we go to school, what we are told is to take notes and to soak up whatever it is that the teacher says so that we can recite it back or that we can write it down on the test. But they learned at a young age the art of the argument. Because time in the temple was time spent arguing over the text. You see, rabbis each had a particular way of interpreting the text. So in the temple, when they were gathered together, one rabbi might say, this is what the Sabbath is for. So on the Sabbath, you are to do this and this, but not that. And another rabbi, hearing that argument, would engage and perhaps say, well, I see what you mean about the Sabbath, and I agree with doing this and this, but I disagree with that. And I present you with this argument instead. They spent time in argument trying to work out how it was that they were going to live faithfully these scriptures. And when a rabbi developed a method or a way of interpreting and living out scriptures, that method, that way, was called the rabbi's yoke. So when you would follow that rabbi's way, you would take that rabbi's yoke upon yourself. And maybe you remember that there's a time in the scriptures when Jesus says, take my yoke upon you, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. But I think that's getting ahead. We're still in part 2 of the educational system. What we know is that Jesus must have been among the best of the best of the best at Beth Talmud, since he can question and answer to everyone's amazement. And if you are the best of the best in Talmud, then you are selected to move forward and study to become a rabbi yourself. And only the best of the best get to do that. Around age 14, you enter into Beth Midrash. Maybe you remember hearing that word a few weeks ago and last week, and here it is again. Beth Midrash, which means the house of study. In this space, you would present yourself to an authoritative rabbi, and you would ask him if you could become his disciple, his student. And this rabbi would then begin to question you. Well, grill you might be a better word. And he would want to find out if you're worthy of taking on his yoke. He wants to make sure that his yoke, his way of interpreting and spreading the scriptures, is carried out as far and as wide as possible. So what happens to those who are not considered the best of the best after the second phase of education? When they are quizzed by the rabbi, then what the rabbi might say to them is, it's obvious that you love God, but you don't have what it takes to be one of my disciples. So go home and ply your trade. Go home and learn the family business. But if a rabbi believed that you were the best of the best of the best, he would say to you, come and follow me. And you would leave everything. You would leave your home and your friends and your synagogue. You would leave everything and devote your entire life to following that rabbi so closely that you would become like him, able to do what he does. This is what it means to be a disciple. And as this process of education developed, a saying began to spring up to develop around this practice of following a rabbi closely. The saying goes like this: may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Because you see, people had seen it happen. A rabbi would come into town, come through your town, followed closely by his disciples who were walking right behind him. And after a day of following their rabbi around, they would be caked, just covered in the dust of whatever it was that rabbi had stepped in. So this saying, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi, it became a blessing that was given to students when they went off to this third level of schooling. May you follow your rabbi so closely that the dust of his feet covers you more deeply. May you follow him so closely that his ways rub off on you and you become covered in his ways, that you become like him. I think this has huge implications for Jesus. Rabbis were known to enter into their own teaching about the age 30. And so when we begin to look at the scriptures and the beginning of Jesus' own ministry, we find out that he is how old? About 30. So let's look at our text in Mark again. Look at what it says. Jesus has just begun his ministry at age 30. He's walking along the Sea of Galilee. And as he passes along the Sea of Galilee, he sees Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Why are they fishermen? They are plying their trade. It means they are not following another rabbi. They didn't make the cut. They're not the best of the best of the best. But when Jesus sees them, what does he say to them? Follow me.
I will make you fishers.
I will make you fish people. And then we get this phrase that if you're like me, you've pondered every time you consider it. And immediately, they left their nets and they followed him. And I don't know about you, but I wondered just what it was that made them drop their nets and follow this guy, this rabbi, unknown rabbi who was just happening to pass their way. And I love Rob Bell's kind of tongue-in-cheek take on this passage. He says that Jesus calling and the disciples just dropping their nets instantaneously is kind of like evidence of first century drug abuse. that Jesus is like this dealer, and there's like, yes, I'll follow you anywhere. I need what you have. I'll just go where you go. And he says, old Bible movies and those old Christian movies, they don't help us very much. They present, maybe you've seen some of these, they present Jesus wearing that nice, clean, white bathrobe with the blue Miss America sash on it. And, he's kind of Swedish. His shampoo hair is blowing in the wind. And he comes and he says, follow me. And then the disciples, they just drop their nets and they follow. And this music begins to play, this emotional music that makes you think, yeah. I should do that too. I should just drop my nets. I don't even know why. But it sounds good, so I should do it. But the question is, why? may drop their nets immediately. Because this rabbi thinks they are good enough. He thinks they are good enough. These ordinary, average guys who were not the best of the best, who had been sent home to ply their trade, who were now working in the family business, they were being called to follow in the dust of Rabbi Jesus. You would drop your nets so fast. You would drop your nets immediately if you had been sent home from Bet Midrash and told you weren't good enough, and someone came along and said, I want you to follow me. You drop your nets. You'd say, this rabbi thinks I can do it. I can do what he does. And the text continues on because he doesn't just find two. He finds James and John working in the boat with their father Zebedee, and they didn't make the cut either. They weren't the best of the best, but when Jesus sees them, he calls them too to be disciples. Come, follow me. He calls them because Jesus' movement, it is for everybody. It is for young and it's for old. It's for men and women, rich and poor. It is for the schooled and the unschooled. It's for everyone. Jesus calls them. Those who've been referred to as the JV team, the B team, the not good enoughs. He calls them to walk in his dust, to walk in his ways. And together, they change the course of history. These ordinary guys and Jesus. How many times have you been told that you were not good enough? I have a friend who's well into her 50s, and when she was in kindergarten, she was told by her teacher when they were doing a coloring exercise. She's 5 years old. She was told by her teacher, you're not doing that right. You can't color. You're not an artist. And that language was implanted in her head at 5 years old. And she says that even today, she has a hard time picking up a coloring book to draw in it. I'm not an artist. I'm not good enough. How many times have you been told you weren't good enough? How many times have you believed that you weren't good enough? See, I love this story because it's not the best of the best of the best. It's ordinary people who Jesus calls. It's the average people, the screw-ups, the ones who spent more time in the principal's office than they did in class, the ones who everyone else gave up on. Those are the ones that Jesus called into service to follow him.
I used to sing a song with the children about this.
All right, we'll get to it.
Well, okay.
We live in an extraordinary place because we serve an extraordinary God. We are ordinary people. But our extraordinary God can do amazing things. Amazing things with ordinary people like you and like me. If we will answer yes when the rabbi comes to call. The only question is, how long will it take for us to drop our safety nets and follow him? Follow in the dust of our rabbi. We're going to prepare to follow Jesus to this table where he has invited all people to join, to share. All are good enough.